Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of the Pink Singers LGBT plus History Month celebrations. My name is Hien, and I'm one of the Pink Singers, London's LGBT plus community choir. Ordinarily, at this time of the year, the Pinkies would be singing in support of various organizations to support their History Month activities, but, well, pandemic, so we can't do it this year. Instead, we're taking this opportunity to look at some of the fascinating histories that actually live within our own diverse community. This week, we'll be speaking to Oskar and his experience of finding family both in our choir and then more recently on the Northern Ballroom scene. And we'll be talking about the dance Vogue and its roots, and in particular, its significance to queer and trans people of color. Before we begin, though, I need to address the pink elephant in the room, which is the use of the word queer. We absolutely must acknowledge that for many people, this word has been used against them as an insult. And as a result, to this day, it can be very hurtful and demeaning to hear the term being bandied about. And we cannot and must not make light of the trauma that the word queer continues to precipitate in people. On the other hand, there has been a move in recent years to reclaim the word and to deliberately take the sting out of it and to use queer as a badge of pride. Some of this is pragmatic, as we alluded to last week. Other catch-all phrases like LGBT plus or LGBT plus QIA all have their own challenges in application. Our complex identities cannot always be mapped to a single letter, and many would prefer not to have them lumped together with others into a single symbol like plus. So like it or loathe it, the word queer has become a commonly used and sort of more equitable umbrella term to refer to how we express our non-normative sexual orientations and gender identities. Perhaps more importantly, though, when it comes to certain subcultures within our community, as indeed we'll be discussing today, queer has been chosen as the term by which the community refers to itself. So when we hear the word queer in today's conversation, we recognize that while it can have a derogatory use, in this context, that is not at all its intention. And we also want to respect the choice that we make in the words that we use to describe ourselves. So with that, I want to really welcome Oskar to the floor. Hello, a warm Pinkie welcome to Oskar.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Oskar. So ordinarily, at this point in our little conversation, I would probably say something about you, but I think half the choir already knows you. But for the other half of the choir who has probably met you just for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about your time in the Pink Singers?
Sure. Well, I joined the Pink Singers, I think, in 2007. I'm not very good with dates, but I think it's around there. And I joined as a female presenting. And yeah, through my time in the choir, I started off in the alto section, moved to the tenors, and then to the basses. Unfortunately, I'd lost my soprano voice by the time I got to the Pinkie, so there was no chance that I could do all sections. And yeah, then I left in 2015, which was the last time I sang with you guys.
So it's been a couple of years, really, quite more than a couple of years, and you ended up moving to Manchester. What drew you to Manchester in particular?
Well, gosh, another Pinkie was here who offered me a place to stay while I got myself sorted out, because I'd split up with my long-term partner at that time, and I'd had enough of London for a long time, so I wanted somewhere else to move to. And Manchester actually reminded me of Berlin a lot, which I really love that city, but I didn't yet have the courage to move to a country where I'd potentially have to learn another language. So I ended up moving to Manchester. Yeah.
And so I guess, I guess we had an established family here with the Pink Singers for a while, but then for various reasons you had to move to a different place. Was it hard to find a new niche for yourself in Manchester where you didn't have a lot of the social contacts?
It wasn't really that hard, because I'd been sort of pointed towards a group called Rainbow Noir before I moved up, um, through, I think it was somebody that I was connected to in whatever, down in London, whatever world. and they put me in contact with Chloe, who's one of the organisers of the group, and she was amazing, really welcoming, and got me gave me details for meeting up with the group, and I met people through there. And it's quite a small community up here, so generally you kind of bump into the same people in the same events. And I mean the QTPOC, queer, intersex, queer, Indigenous, Black people of colour, queer people of colour are all are a smaller group within that group. So I'm just sort of it's quite intimate, which is really lovely.
I mean, for those of us who've never been to Manchester and don't know what Rainbow Noir is, can you give us a little bit of a description about what that group's about?
Yeah, Rainbow Noir is basically a QTPOC support group, social group. We meet once a month, have various events. Right now they're actually doing an online cook together. So and we just share culture, knowledge, just be with each other. It's a really lovely space to be in, where we're not having to code switch or perform in any way for sort of anyone outside of the QTPOC community, if you like. We know we can be safe and speak freely about our experience without having to explain or defend it. So it's really nourishing. It's not something I really had a lot of experience with in London. So it was really, it was kind of a revelation to me to like spend time with other queer people of color and sort of realize that a lot of my experience wasn't isolated or, you know, imagined, which is often something that comes up with marginalized people.
It's very interesting. So for people who don't know the term QTPOC, it's either spelled QTPOC or
Yeah.
QTIPOC. And what that means, it's an acronym for queer and trans people of color, or queer and trans intersex people of color. And sometimes the I also means indigenous. So it depends on really different parts of the world where the term is actually used, what the actual acronym refers to.
Yeah.
I think, you know, so Rainbow Noir sounds like you found a real group that could support you and explore your identity in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that lead to the House of Noir?
Well, House of Noir is in response to, there's lots of things going on there. So the Vogue, there's a film documentary that was made called Deep in Vogue, which is all about the Northern Ballroom scene. And a lot of the Northern Ballroom scene up until recently has been very white and quite sort of performer orientated, so dancers and professional dancers and stuff like that, which is, you know, totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And so one of the Northern Vogue power players, if you like, Darren Pritchard, is basically decided that he wanted to bring more QTPOC people into the houses, into the ballroom scene, to sort of balance that out, because that's the Black and Latinx community is where that art form has come from. So he put together House of Noir, which is based in Manchester. Previously, he had House of Ghetto. He has House of Ghetto, which is Black working class women, and then he also was involved in the sort of creation of other houses across the north. So House of Flavor, House of Black, House of Mystique. I'm not sure if he was involved with House of Finesse, but they're basically mainly or almost completely QTPOC, trans intersex people. So balance to sort of bring balance to the scene up here.
That is really fascinating. So I think before we talk about what the scene is like now, I think we need to go back into the past and talk about what the scene was like then. I think most of us, if we have experience of ballroom, is actually through shows like Pose,
Yeah.
or transient sort of watching Madonna's Vogue video on MTV way back when. Can you tell me a little bit about what ballroom is?
Yeah, so ballroom has its roots in the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, which was a sort of explosion of artistic exploration in the Harlem community, the Black community. And then more recently in the 1960s, Vogue ballroom sort of came out of that, or ballroom from the Black and Latinx community came out of that in response to um, you had basically a lot of balls which were mainly run and organized and sort of for the white community, in which some Black and Latino queens were allowed to be part of, but they were on the whole mainly excluded. So the Black and Latinx community started to create their own balls for their own spaces, and they were mainly about pageantry at that point. And so they're sort of for the queens and other trans people, just creating a space that where we could celebrate ourselves and our identities and our aspirations and be celebrated by our community, in a world where we were often not celebrated at all. And then there's Vogue dance comes slightly later. And I'm not quite sure what the dates are for that, but there's two conflicting stories. There's Paris Dupree, who is a famous is sort of recognized as the mother of ballroom dance, Vogue dance, where she was in a club flicking through a Vogue magazine and started to emulate the poses to music, and that's one story about where Vogue dance came from. And the second is that the prisoners in Rikers Island used to use Vogue or developed Vogue dancing as a way of attracting each other and expressing themselves. It's very much about expression. And yeah, that's the sort of beginnings of it. And then there's three styles which are mainly recognized, which is Old Way, which is sort of very structured, and New Way, which is a bit more acrobatic. There's more sort of balances and poses and that. And then we move into Vogue Femme, which is what people mainly recognize these days, um, uh, with the sort of dance styles, which is slightly more aggressive and tends to be more about a more feminine style. It's more about accentuating femininity rather than Old Way and New Way, which is a little bit more masculine, more angular.
I think it's very interesting that so there's this origin, in a sense, of ballroom that comes out of the drag pageants in the past, and then also some very stylized moves around sort of gender identities in this particular community. Um, but that's not just these not it's not about drag, is it, per se? It's there's a ways of representing oneself in different ways. And can you tell me a little bit about about competitions and how these things are set up and how people are, yeah, the purpose of competitions in a way?
Well, there's well, I mean, um, the underlying criteria, I guess, you're looking at in ballroom is realness. So the ability of the person who's either walking or performing or dancing in some way to convince those who are judging them on the authenticity of their sort of presentation. So we have like categories like well, realness in terms of transness. So would is linked to passing, basically. So in a sort of a category where two trans women might be walking against each other, it would be they would be judged on their ability to pass as a real woman or a real man. And that's sort of where realness comes from in that sense. But it extends further beyond that point into, you can have executive realness or gangster realness, or whatever. So you're embodying the energy of the category that you're being given, and how well you can present that, how convincing you can be in that space. And as a performer, it's about it really embodying that and giving yourself permission to be seen that way, which I find personally very liberating, because often I spend most of my time practicing not being seen. So to put yourself out on stage in a way that is like, you cannot, I'm not in any way trying not to be seen, or I'm very much sort of, here I am. And it's really quite amazing to have that experience. And I found that's very transformational for me as well, as a person who's often sort of hiding away in the background.
So I understand that in some cases, the idea of realness was an escapist fantasy, or a way of sort of detracting from someone's, I guess, day-to-day life. And this is particularly true, certainly, when you look at the Black Paris is Burning, which is a documentary on the Vogue and ballroom scene in the 80s. What is your feeling around that? Do you think it's still relevant today?
Absolutely. I mean, for the trans community, Black, Latinx, people of color often are still in societies or situations where they are denied the basic kind of privileges of people who are not like them. And these are spaces where we can express ourselves and allow ourselves to be, for that moment, or for those moments, to be in those spaces where we can see dream the possibility of ourselves. So like, I think the statistic for trans people of color is that like 80% of them are unable to get employment, or maybe even higher, other than sort of very specific fetishized areas like sex work. So to be able to go into a space and have people celebrate you as you walk down the catwalk as a CEO of your own company, that's a real, like, that's a real powerful moment of dreaming of a possibility for yourself, even in the space, in the face of potentially never being given the opportunity or having the opportunity to do that. So, and from again, I can't speak for Manchester particularly, as I'm not a young person anymore living in these societies. But like, with historically, when the houses were created, we were talking about kids of 13, 14, 15 years old who've been thrown out of their houses for being who they are, and not having anything more than a very basic education or opportunities to sort of find any kind of work that offers career progression, in that, and just sort of banding together and living in those houses. Their only opportunity possibly for being able to live the life of a executive or a pop star or somebody who's a model and adored is in these ball spaces. And it's even though it is fantasy, it's also in a way visioning as well, like to continue to see that possibility is available to you against a world that tells you that it isn't available to you is pretty powerful stuff, I think.
You spoke of houses there being sort of a kind of a mutual support group and creating a safe space for people who don't have a lot of these privileges, who say were kicked out of their homes. Um, to use that clearly was really important in the 80s, and it's very clear when you look at these documentaries and sort of more recent TV shows about that period. But do you think that still is important now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely. I mean, what queer culture has to offer in the world is this real return to community and interconnectedness in terms of how we support each other, different ways of living with each other, supporting each other collectively, holding, you know, stuff together. So like, it's not it's a sort of move of born out of necessity. Basically, you didn't have much, you weren't always able to make much, so you were very real, in a very real way, dependent upon the chosen family that you create around you. Often house mothers or fathers would be slightly older, able to get some sort of work or have a dependable form of work, and they would share whatever they had with the children, and educate those children on how they could survive and potentially gain some sort of support for themselves or gain some sort of work for themselves. So there's a real interdependence and a willingness to be with each other in a way that I think we become slightly less tolerant as we become more able to sort of move into more mainstream spaces and not have that sort of same relationship that we've had maybe in the past with people in our communities. So we start to draw these lines where before we may not have drawn the lines so so strongly.
I agree with you in that. I think it's very uh, modern identities are very complex and overlapping, and we have a tendency as human beings to want to sort of cluster, and become tribal. And it is important to sort of to share identities as well, to look at the commonalities rather than to look at the differences. And there's a tendency to do that.
Yeah. And also the opportunity for growth there. I mean, often I'm quite often challenged by the expression of other people's identities, or the expression of other people by other people of how they see the world based on their identities. But in the position I'm in, I often have to sit back and just go, okay, well, I'm just going to let that be there and not get into any kind of confrontation about that, because I don't often have the sort of security in those spaces to do that. So, and that's not as a, don't not want to come across sounding like a victim to these circumstances, because that's not really what I'm meaning. But like, I choose my battles very carefully, basically. But it's also an opportunity for me to like just have a bit of insight into how they see the world, how they operate in the world. What are the things that make their, what are their barriers? Because I see things in a different way, obviously. And how do my barriers and their barriers kind of beat up against each other? And really, are they all that important when it comes down to it?
Can we go back to what you talked about earlier, which is that the reason why House of Noir was set up as a ballroom house was to try to bring back that sort of Black and Latinx representation in the ballroom scene. So at some point the ballroom scene must have become, I guess, more mainstream for a number of reasons. Um, how did that happen, and what was the response to that, and why is there this desire to reclaim it?
Well, I don't. I think the catalyst for it moving into the mainstream obviously is Madonna's Vogue. Like, it didn't, you know, it wasn't on anybody's radar other than the people who existed in it before that. And there is a, you know, there is a tendency in our, the wider mainstream sort of community to take things from marginalized groups and in a way claim their own, you know, which is, it's, I don't think it's intentional. I think a lot of the time it's, you know, oh, this is really cool and new and fresh and wonderful, and I want to make it part of me because I want to, you know, I want to have that energy. But then there's the lack of acknowledgement that comes from that, and those communities don't necessarily benefit from that uplifting, if you like. So it's more in that sense. I think when Madonna brought Vogue in, and the house, and so certain houses started to gain popularity or visibility. So one house, like House of Ninja, is very well known. House of Gucci. You know, there's these usually connected to fashion houses because that's, you know, the kind of aspirational stuff that they were reaching out for. But Willie Ninja particularly was a very like famous Vogue ancestor and had a very specific style, and so those houses started to like franchise, which in some way is great, but also the payment for that is that you have these groups who are now spreading globally across the world and raising visibility in a lot of ways, but they're not really feeding back into the community as such. I mean, and that's a very vague generalization based on my limited experience of it, because I'm not part of the wider, I don't feel like I'm in the wider ballroom Vogue scene. I'm not a Vogue, I don't dance, I'm just there for walking. So I think there's a difference very much in that dynamic as well. And I haven't been in the ballroom scene for that long, so please forgive me, anyone who's in the ballroom scene who might be seeing this later on. Yeah, so I feel like in the North, before, like I said, Deep in Vogue can give you a lot better, clearer picture of what it was like before these houses started to come in, because that's pretty much the houses that were originally here before. So and were responsible for bringing, I think, Vogue into the North. So Darren Suarez, who's in Liverpool, House of Suarez, he's instrumental in bringing Vogue culture across into the North. Darren Pritchard, and then there's Grace Only Smith, who's House of Decay, and I don't know if there's any others. And again, forgive me if I've missed any of them. But they're predominantly white houses, predominantly professional performers. So, and again, nothing wrong with that, but there is a significant cutie pop community here who didn't have access to that. So they may have gone and seen them, and but there weren't really any opportunities for people like myself or other cutie pop people who weren't professional dancers or performers to actually claim that space for themselves, which is, again, what I referred to earlier as this transformative space where we actually get to envision ourselves and embody ourselves in these places that we would never really get into. So I think Darren Pritchard, who I said helped to bring these houses about, really saw that was the spirit, you know, wanting to bring back that kind of spirit into the balls up here, which is pretty amazing, I think. And we've had some pretty amazing responses from people. So I think it's definitely something that he saw was needed.
Speaking of sort of envisioning yourself, can I show a couple of pictures
Yeah,
of
sure.
you? Because I don't know whether you can see this.
I can't, but
Yeah. Can anyone else see? So this is Oscar. This is you at the House of Suarez ball. You're dressed in
Not yet,
pearls.
Cian.
Can you see it?
No,
Oh, no,
not
there
yet.
we go.
Oh, there they
There
come.
we,
here we
there we
go.
go.
Aha.
Can you see? So this is Oscar at the House of Suarez ball. This is presumably in Liverpool, I'm guessing.
No, this was this. He does two, one in Liverpool and one in Manchester, and this
Okay.
was in Manchester. And I'm actually part of a group that's walking this at the moment. It's the Atlantis Ball, and we were kind of like we were doing basically the group walk, which was sort of Atlantis royalty, basically.
I think I have another picture. Is this the Atlantis royalty?
Yes, that's House Noir there. Yeah.
You're so glamorous. I love it. So
They're
how long does
all-
it take to put these outfits together?
It takes some take longer than others, and these ones were done by Christian and Ken. Christian, who's left the house now to pursue his sort of artistic career, and then Ken Morris, who makes the majority of our outfits. He basically just does them constantly. It's his sort of his therapy, as he calls it. So we have our in-house designer.
So is this worn in a competition, or are you just sort of, is it like a demonstration?
It's well, every walk is a competition. Every walk has a category, and every category has a winner.
Okay.
So it's always, we're always competing, but it's not really about being better than the other person. It's again it's about realness. How real can we be on this walk for ourselves, and also just to really have a moment of taking in other people celebrating us. I mean, particularly, I've got a fat trans body, which a brown fat trans body, which is, not a body that's often seen or celebrated in the sort of mainstream world. So to walk down a catwalk and have people cheering and going, yes, it's pretty. It's strange, uncomfortable, but also amazing.
Incredible. And we had this picture of you.
Yeah,
I think this is at another House of Suarez.
that's the same ball. Yeah, this is
Oh, it is,
Sex
okay.
Siren, which is a body category. So I made that one. So that's one of the ones I've made. And I just basically challenged myself to walk Sex Siren, because again, it's not a body that you would expect to see in that category. So I just was like, okay, I'm going to put myself out there and see what happens.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. I think it's incredibly interesting, and I'm sure there are loads of questions about the Northern Ballroom scene and basically the QT experience up there. There were your conversations provoked a lot of chat. So we have a question from Cormac, who asks, now that Pose has been seen by and how is Pose, which is the TV show, been viewed by the QT pop community? Do you feel it has helped to raise awareness?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for people to talk about stories, isn't it? So, and that's the beginning of anything. I think what's most significant about Pose is it's written by people from the community. It includes people who are from the community. It's not cis women pretending to be trans. It's trans women in there, and that is a huge thing for us as a wider community. I think to really see people who we recognise as people who are from the community and who had lived experience of those stories, and that means a lot. So, and I think from a awareness point of view, Um, I'm half white, so I have that privilege as part of my history. And I sat down, I watched Pose with my mum, and that was really helpful in helping her to start to understand what my experience is like as a visibly non-white person, and as a trans person, and as a queer person, because she doesn't live in those worlds. And sometimes it's difficult to explain to her or to have her see where I'm coming from, because for her, those realities just don't exist. And to have a separate visual story for her to plug into, which isn't loaded with all of the emotional stuff that comes from having this relationship with your child. I think it was really helpful in us being able to talk about some things which we had, and her to sort of start to understand things which we weren't able to do before.
Yeah, I find that television and I guess some of the programming that we've seen more recently has actually provoked a lot of conversation, often in sort of areas where we wouldn't ordinarily have these kinds of the ability to even introduce the topics to people. So
Yeah,
I think that's been really good. Clearly, there's a lot more that can be done about sort of representation, about telling sort of some of the finer points of stories.
yeah.
Um, Annie asks, there's a fine line between co-optation and solidarity. So how do we stay on the right side of that?
I don't know. How do we? I don't. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm just, I don't have a academic history, so I can't really speak with any kind of academic authority on this. But I think from a practical lived experience, um, you just we have to accept that we're not going to get it right all the time, and be flexible. To retain our flexibility as human beings, to listen to the people who are not being served, and to ask how we can change whatever it is we're doing to serve those people. And from a co-optation versus solidarity, I think we can we tend as human beings to try to put things in place ahead of the actual implementation of the thing, and then from that position we sort of uh, take on a certain moral and intellectual authority by saying, look, I thought about how this works and therefore this is how it's supposed to work. Whereas the reality of a situation is often that we do our best to create something with the best intention, and then life comes back and says, hey, you didn't really work this out the way you thought you did. And now you need to, you know, employ some courage and humility and say, okay, I got it wrong. How do we fix this? And maybe you know something that I don't know, and maybe I know something that you don't know, and together we can come up with a new solution, which probably won't work the way we thought it was going to work, but we'll give it a shot and see where it takes us. Um, and in terms of this solidarity piece, it's like the the thing I think makes things most clear, for me at least, is asking myself, who's really benefiting? If you put a solution or a situation in place and you can see that the people who have created or are intended as the end point of benefit, are they really getting the benefit? Are they really getting the bulk of the benefit? Are they really getting is the intention to share equally? Again, like there's layers in this. Capitalism teaches us that we can never have enough, and we should always protect ourselves and what we believe is ours, versus against what people are trying to take away from us. But actually, the reality is that we live in a world of finite resources, and in order for us all to benefit, we maybe have to have a little less and share a little more. So I think the results are always going to inform us about what is really happening versus what we hope or intend think will happen in the future if we just keep doing the thing that we think is right. If that makes sense. I don't know if I waffled on a bit there.
I didn't know how to say that. That was probably the best answer to one of the age-old and gnarliest questions that I think our community has to deal with at the moment. You know, the issues of appropriation versus celebration. How does that work? And who owns things? And who has the rights? And you know, what is about spreading the word, and what is about sort of keeping authenticity? There's so many different challenges that we face at the moment. Yeah. But that was a very, very good answer. Thank you very much. I have another question, and this is from Simon, who asks, I can see the need for passing partly as a matter of safety, but is there a growing space for more ambiguous and complex identities, as your photos so gloriously point towards?
Well, thank you for the compliment. Okay, passing is a sticky subject, depending on who you speak to. I think, you know, some people just want to pass, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you any less or more of a person for doing either of these things. Its roots are very much in safety. You know, trans people are basically on a daily basis reminded of their disposability, and in some places they're a lot more disposable than in others. And again, you know, there's a lot of privilege in where we are as a society here, that I can openly talk about my transness and non-binariness in a space where I know it will be seen by people who are not part of my community. So I think with the sort of the evolution of language, especially around and stories around non-binary people, we're starting to see more of what's coming forward, which is you know, a trans or non-gender conforming identity which does not want to be seen as end pointing in either of the binaries. This has existed since the beginning of time. So it's like, it's not, as soon as humans started playing with gender, we always had people who wanted to slide back and forth in the between. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we've kind of got stuck in this idea that there's just two endpoints. And we need to start having these conversations to allow ourselves to be more fluid again, and allow, you know, if you want to be fixed in one point, that's great. If you want to be fixed in one point and stick your toe in the water every now and then on a special occasion, that's great. Or if you just want to play around in between and do whatever you want with those identities, that's okay too. And it's just about giving ourselves the space to not feel threatened, because of, you know, obviously, and a lot of times the responses, the extreme responses that we get are as a result of people being threatened by the ideas that we express. And this idea that my transness and my non-binariness is in some way insisting that you become trans and non-binary yourself. I don't care what your gender expression is. You can have whatever gender expression you like, and as long as you're comfortable with it, I'm happy with that. Just don't want my gender expression to be, you know, cancelled out by your expression. And I think there's space for all expressions in this world. And we just need to be a bit more secure about that. And definitely having conversations and having more people who are willing to put themselves out there is part of that evolution.
Thank you. David has a question. He asks, have you surprised yourself in terms of this newfound love? What ballroom have you enjoyed the most?
Gosh, yes, I have surprised myself. It's been an amazing journey, actually. When Darren first asked me to join the House of Noir, I was not particularly willing. because again, like I said, I have a lifetime of putting myself in the background. So the idea of putting myself on stage in that way, I mean, in a choir, I'm in a group and often in the back rows. And I have done some performances before that, but it's never been about, you know, being the center of attention. So it was really kind of, it took some convincing, basically. And I did it, initially I did it for, and I still do it, for other people. So like, I know when I get up on that stage and people see my trans, brown, fat body, and they are in those bodies as well, and they see me up there and they think, oh, wow, you look amazing, or, oh, wow, you're like on stage. They realize that there's a space for them in the world. And that's really important. And that's a big part of why I agreed to be part of the ballroom scene up here, because I want people to know that they have a place in the world, because I know what it's like to grow up believing that I didn't have that. But as I did it more, I started to notice that there was also a little voice in me that was kind of like getting a bit louder, because I was getting this kind of recognition from people. You know, I didn't really expect it to have that effect on me, but to go out into that space and have people just cheer the hell out of you for wearing stuff that you wouldn't wear before, or looking in a way that you wouldn't have looked at before, it just really hit deep. And I was like, oh wow, if I can do that, then, and then I, you know, that's why I did the sex siren, because I was like, well, why not be sexy for a change? And you know, and then also in the future, I'd like to do what they call baby Vogue, which is, you know, someone who's not really a dancer going out and giving it a shot. So it's just pushing myself and seeing where I can go, where I can see myself in those spaces.
I can say that the next time there is a ball, I'm definitely coming up to Manchester, and I'm definitely coming to one of them. And I would love to walk if we could, but
oh
yeah,
yeah, well, there's a little bit
so
at
fascinating.
At the end of each ball, we usually Ricky Beadle Blair comes up and MCs, and he gets people from the audience to come up and walk. So it's part of it. Yeah.
I'm so totally there. Phil has a question, and his question is really around the sort of the costuming and costume work. So, having illustrated some of the costume work done in the House of Noir, you credited one particular designer maker.
Yeah.
But Phil is really interested in the process of creation. How much of that is collaboration, and what resources are available to the house and to you to make your designs?
Well, so we get, it depends on the ball is the answer. Sometimes we have budget, sometimes we don't. Ken is just a passionate maker, and his work is art, just art. It's let me get you some stuff. Hang on. I can't not show you his.
There's a couple of hands as well come up. I'm not sure whether they're questions or Amy and Ali have got their hand up.
Yeah, I will definitely get to that.
Right.
So this is one of his. This is one of his pieces. It's a flak jacket. He made it just after, I think Stormzy did one where he had a flak jacket in one of his performances. So he made this in response to that, which is the Solidarity Fist with the trans colors. He makes lots of trans stuff for me, obviously, and then trans flag on the back. His first piece he made for me was a jacket. And that was quite collaborative. He asked what I was looking for, and I'm terrible because I literally just, I'm not a fashion person yet. and so we went with a sort of tree design, and he I said I like trees. He started putting trees on. He had the rainbow colors in the trunk, and then on the back he did one with trans colors. And then he made these leather leaves, because we've got like people from the kink community, myself included as well there. So he made leaves out of brown and black leather, and then he added these like silver skeleton leaves, and the leaves are supposed to represent sort of kinky people of color, and then the skeleton leaves are the trans people who've been killed. So it became a real story in that jacket, and he tends to do that a lot with his work. He'll talk to the members of the house, or I mean, he knows us so well now, and he just makes pieces with us in mind, and brings a story into that. Like we did a walk for kinky people of color where he put kente print into these harnesses, which they're just amazing. So like I keep telling him to go and sell them, but he's not yet to do that.
We need more photos. We need more photos. I've got a couple of questions now from people in the audience. So Amy, do you want to ask your question in person? Unmute yourself. That's you, Amy.
You don't want to ask the question? If you are asking the question, I can't hear you.
Terribly sorry. I must have only accidentally hit the raised hand, or maybe it's the other Amy.
Okay.
Amy A1, is that?
I'm sorry, I didn't have a question.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll go to Ali then.
Hi, Oskar. Thank you so much, first of all. Hello, so good to see you. It's been so interesting, and thank you for being so open. And I think it's just been really fascinating and something I knew very little about. And I just thought it sounds like the ballroom scene in Manchester is so positive and such an accepting space, which I have to say seems quite different from the bitchiness depicted on Pose, which is my only other kind of bit of reference about the ballroom scene. But I just wondered, one of the things that we're doing in Pinkies at the moment is working on improving our diversity and inclusion in our community. And I just wondered if you have any kind of tips and ideas based on your experience of ballroom about what works well, and maybe from your experience of Pinkies in the past as well.
Gosh, that's a huge question. Well, I mean, I think it's also important to acknowledge that shade is part of ballroom culture, and shade isn't. I mean, it can be seen externally as bitchiness, but it's also about love, because when you're in a crappy space and your life is pretty crappy, it's kind of, or hard, I should say, not necessarily crappy, but sometimes crappy. It's kind of disingenuous to throw compliments at somebody, you know what I mean? So it's almost I'm not saying that this is always the case, but there's a sort of a love that comes with honesty, and just, reading and shade are all about that, giving people, not trying to, for want of a better word, polish the turd. So that it's, it is part of the culture, and it's done with, often it's done with love between people who understand that that's the agreement, as opposed to just being mean to somebody who doesn't know that that's something. In terms of inclusion and diversity, it's a difficult question, and it's not, there is no single answer to that solution. We're dealing with layers and layers of history that is about excluding people. So we have people on one side, people who believe that they just don't belong in that space because that's how it's always been for them, for their parents, for their grandparents, maybe. Again, my privilege is that I have a white mother, and she basically educated me to believe that I have a right to stand in those spaces. So I often do, regardless of how I'm received. It's just a kind of, I'm going to take this space up. So there's a need for explicitly reaching out to those people if they're the people that you want, and also making space for them, because again, you don't take up space if you're taught that you're not in the center of things. And as a person who's taught that you're in the center of things, you might not think about stepping back and giving that space up to people. And I think that's where a lot of tensions kind of come up between white and QTPOC communities, is that a lot of times very well-meaning white people see themselves as being allies when actually they're just taking up space. And a lot of the time it's simple. You just, like, the best way to be an ally is to take your mic and give it to the person who's not being given the mic. And so it's like, how can you do that? Yeah. And I think for Pinkies in particular, it's a real challenge, because you're a large body of mainly white people. And when a person of color walks into that space, it is not a comfortable space. Not because you've done anything, but because you're a large body of white people. And often, I'm used to being around white people because half of my family is white. I can make that adjustment. But if you're a person who's not got that element in there, that is a very alien environment to walk into. And also, if you're just on your own, and also if a lot of what you're hearing is very white, very middle class, there are barriers, layers of barriers that come with that. And I don't really have an answer as to how you can make that more inclusive, other than to just keep trying to be inclusive, keep hearing what feedback people might be giving, and making space for that feedback to come through, because it might not come through the first time or the second time or the third time, because we're taught to keep quiet in those spaces. So, and some people will, like myself, be able to be in those spaces, and other people will just not be able to find a way to make that jump. And it'll take time. I think it'll take a good few years of real work to start to see that balance come through.
I love the visual image of handing the microphone to somebody else who has less of a voice. I think that's a really apt kind of visual way of thinking about how we can do that work in Pinkies. But thank you for your very thoughtful answer. That was brilliant.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oskar. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to ask?
I have fixed the world now.
I just asked the question, Cian.
Yes.
How do they choose the themes? For the themes for each ballroom?
Oh, themes.
Yeah, because I just wondered where they come up with. I mean, I've only ever seen Pose, like Ali said as well, but
I think the overarching themes are decided by, it depends on who's running the ball. So the overarching theme is probably decided by the people or person who owns that sort of sphere of responsibility. There are some sort of set categories within the ball. So there's usually a body category, so that's like sex siren, face, beauty category, though I mean it depends on who signs up as well. We have like the dance categories, so depending on what styles people dance, you could have new way, old way, Vogue femme, and then others are walking categories. They're more fluid, so you can have like executive realness, or we had kinky people of color. So it's about visibility and giving people in the room visibility of themselves through other people, or as a way of showing off, you know. So that's as far
That's
as
cool. No, yeah, I just wondered, yeah, because it was when I've watched Pose, it's just kind of, I just don't know where they came from, and also like how much in advance do you know about that theme? So how long does it take?
You know,
you to
up
get
front.
ready?
So as soon as we've agreed to the ball, even as we're asked, they'll say these are the categories, and you have to tell them who's going to walk what category or dance what category, depending on how many people want to be part of that.
Cool. Thanks, Oskar. Cheers.
So once again, thank you very much, Oskar, for what has been a very illuminating and fascinating conversation this afternoon. Pinkie, thank you so much for being with us again. And if you're down in London, please come and join us. And obviously, whenever we're up in Manchester, we're definitely going to a ball.
Or just come up for tea and coffee and we can chat more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.